Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I am Carlos Bosques and I'm the CEO of the Food Allergy Science Initiative. At FASI, our focus is to understand, translate, and intervene with food allergies. And we have established a unique collaborative network of leading scientists focused on bringing us one step closer to a cure. In a short period of time, FASI has changed the landscape of food allergy research, and we are excited for the road ahead. This year, we've put together an exciting lineup of speakers for our seminar series, Our Journey to a Cure. Throughout the year, we will take you along for our journey through FASI's endeavor to create a world without food allergies. Join us for a monthly seminar series where we will spotlight critical science on the path to developing transformative therapies. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by Dr. Isaac Hsu. Isaac is an associate professor in the Department of Immunology at Harvard Medical School and is a FASI investigator. And Dr. Hsu's research focuses on the interaction between the nervous and the immune system at the major barriers of tissues, including the skin and the gastrointestinal tract. Dr. Hsu is interested in defining neuroimmune signaling that drives allergic reaction, including itch and inflammation. Isaac, it is an honor to have you here. Thank you for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Carlos. It's my great pleasure to be here as well. And thank you for the support from FASI on our research.
It is an honor, Isaac. So, Isaac, I know there's a lot of great science that you like to talk about, but before we get into that, it would be great for our audience to get to know you a bit more. And can you tell us a bit more about how you got to where you are, and specifically, what was your interest in really studying neuroimmune connection to food allergies?
Thank you. Yes. So I'm an associate professor in the Department of Immunology, and my lab focuses on neuroimmunology, which is the crosstalk between the nervous system and the immune system. And I've always been fascinated about how these two systems, these complex systems, are very similar, and they both have complex interactions within the system, but they've also evolved mechanisms that are parallel, so they both have memory. And how do these two systems talk to each other? And so I've been fascinated by this in terms of my research since I was an undergraduate. I've been studying immunology first. I was an immunology PhD by training. And then at that time, I was interested in immune cells in the brain and neurodegenerative diseases. But then as a postdoctoral fellow, I also then really learned in Dr. Clifford Wolf's lab at Children's Hospital about pain and how the nervous system and the immune system and peripheral tissues closely interact to mediate pain, and how pain and other mechanisms like itch, which I'll talk about today, is really, there's a lot of interface between these two systems that drive pain and itch, and vice versa, how neurons can drive the immune response. So that's how in terms of research, have gone into this area. In particular for food allergies, I have a personal interest in food allergies. So my son and myself actually both have food allergies. My son, who's now 11 years old, has more severe food allergies. And I remember as a 1-year-old when he first anaphylaxed to tree nuts, it was really scary for both my wife and I. And understanding that that the basis for food allergies, it's something that's increasing in prevalence, and yet we don't really understand fully the mechanisms of why there are more and more food allergies and why it's more severe. Could the nervous system play a role? That's one of the areas that FASI is really supporting. And my son has over the years also had a few more episodes, and so I'm personally interested in trying to find out ways of preventing or treating food allergies as well.
That's great. That's great, Isaac. Thanks for sharing that with us. And it is something that impact so many people. So I'm glad that you're using all your brain power, everything you know to really tackle this problem head on. So thank you for doing that. Isaac, well, we're talking a lot, that intersect about itch and food allergies. And I want to just, for our audience, if you could break down this concept of itch in simple terms for our audience, what is itch? Why do we itch? Why is it important? Can you tell our audience a bit more about itch?
Yes. So I'm going to start my presentation now, and I'm going to tell you about itch and what it is, like you just said, Carlos. So scratching an itch. What is itch? Why do we itch? So itch is an unpleasant sensation that we've all experienced. And by definition, actually, I was just at the World Congress of Itch. The itch is defined as a sensation that evokes a desire to scratch, and it's something that we experience, and it's, you can see that it's conserved. One of the questions is, why do we itch? And actually, I feel like in this question, still, even as scientists, we don't completely understand what the role of itch is. Is it good or bad for us? Why do we itch? I mean, these are ideas. One would be to remove irritants from the surface of the skin. Another would be to get rid of ectoparasites or insects like mosquitoes. And we know that, insect bites can induce itch. Another possibility is maybe the scratching of the skin actually induces an immune response that in some way promotes protective immunity in certain contexts, maybe towards a parasite or towards an insect injected factor. But we also know that itch is what occurs during allergies. So allergic reactions are often coupled with this itchy sensation, right? And there's also mirror itch, which is the idea that when you think about itching, when you watch me scratching, you also start feeling an itch. And this could be a population-wide kind of way of promoting a behavioral response that could be, again, to remove things like insects. So these are all just ideas, but I think it's something that scientists are really actively asking. Why do we itch? But then the other question is, what causes itch? And there are many different things that can trigger this itchy or unpleasant sensation. And these are called pruritogens. So insect bites, mosquito bites will cause itch. There are also compounds from plants. This is a cowhage. There are these little spicules in this plant that is extremely itchy. There are many plant-derived compounds, when they contact our skin, can induce itch. But there's also things from within our body. For example, the immune cells, like mast cells, secrete many different factors like histamine or serotonin, which can trigger itch. So when you have an allergic reaction, mast cells in the skin will trigger itch. And also we know immune factors like cytokines, we know can trigger these nerves that mediate itch and cause them to be more sensitive. So there are many different pruritogens. I think that a lot of these are known to acutely trigger itch. One of the questions is, what are the mechanisms of chronic itch as well? During situations where itch is occurring in our skin, and I'll get into some of these skin diseases characterized by chronic itch. So another very important concept that I think we need to think about for related to allergies and food allergies, and also generally for why we need to think about itch, is the itch scratch cycle. So we know that itch, will induce a desire to scratch, and when we scratch, this will actually temporarily relieve that sensation, right, of itch. In a way, it's almost pleasurable when you scratch to relieve the itch. But this concurrently leads to breakdown of the skin barrier. And unfortunately, the breakdown of skin barrier then will lead to penetration of the skin of irritants and other things, and also stimulate an immune response, inflammatory response, which can further activate the nerves that mediate itch to drive greater itch. And then you have this vicious cycle of itch scratch, which in situations like chronic skin disease, like atopic dermatitis, this is very harmful because it really can cause a lot of damage to the skin. So I hope that helps answer your question, Carlos, about what is itch and what causes it.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Such a prevalent and conserved reaction that you would imagine everything should be known by now about what is itch and why is it happening and all the mechanisms, and clearly it's not the case. So um this is very, very interesting. How, there's a lot of theories out there about food allergies and how they start and where they start. And one of them obviously is, food allergy starts at the skin and it's connected to itch. So can you tell us a bit more about what are your thoughts about this and how do you see this connection?
Yes, great. So this is a very interesting question. How does itch relate to food allergies? So you might think that food allergies is in the gut, but actually it may originate, or there's this theory that it could start in the skin. And so one of the diseases that I think many patients who have food allergies actually had as well at some point is atopic dermatitis. So atopic dermatitis is an itchy skin disease that affects up to 20% of children and 10% of adults in the US. And this is a disease characterized by these itchy eczematous skin lesions. And you could see that there's a lot of damage on these lesions, but also if you zoom in at the skin, you'll see hyperinnervation, so more nerves sprout into these areas. And it even can be termed the itch that rashes. So again, this itch scratch cycle where itch might occur first and then induces a lesion, and then there's this feedback mechanism. Why is this relevant to food allergies? Well, there's what's called the atopic march. So atopic dermatitis, or the allergic march, often occurs as the first disease on this progression of allergic diseases, where eczema happens first, followed by food allergies, asthma, and rhinitis, allergic rhinitis. This is actually data where you could see early on kids from ages 0 to 5 first get atopic dermatitis, followed by food allergies. So could it be that the atopic dermatitis and exposure to food allergens triggers downstream food allergies? So that's one of the theories out there. And one of the reasons, and these are just also ideas of how this could occur, is that when you have atopic dermatitis, you get this itchy skin, and the itch and scratching damages the skin. And one possibility is that food antigens, such as peanut or egg-derived antigens, are taken up via the skin and recognized as allergens. It could also be that you're exposed to these food allergens at the wrong time. So when you're having this skin inflammation occurring that's allergic, that molecules from the skin released by the skin damage and also immune cells could circulate potentially from the skin to the gut. So all of these things, this concurrent exposure could lead then to development of food allergies. I think what's really interesting too is the nervous system, which we study, which could be in some way linking the skin to the gut as well. So this is something that we're quite interested in, and I think the field is quite interested in, is to understand why does the skin allergic reaction, atopic dermatitis, occur before gut inflammation and food allergies, and this is one possibility of that explanation. So really, this skin to gut axis is quite fascinating. So could it be, again, that we're exposed early life to food allergens concurrent with atopic dermatitis and scratching of the skin? This then primes the immune system in a way to respond to these antigens or allergens as if there's something harmful. And then when we're exposed to the food, then we have a food allergy.
Thank you. Thank you, Isaac. This is great. And this really connects to, I was reading your most recent publication, and as always, incredible science that you and your team are doing in understanding better the nervous system in connection to these responses. And, in that publication, you really describe a novel mechanisms in which allergens, in this case, specifically from bacteria, are recognized by the nervous systems on your skin, and that really activate this cascade of itch. Very exciting from a scientific perspective. I love it. Maybe I wonder if you could explain this at a simpler level, in simple terms for our audience, because it's certainly a very, very exciting, novel field.
Yes, thank you, Carlos. So I thank you for alluding to our recent work, and I think us, as well as many scientists in the field of itch, are really trying to understand fundamentally what can cause and trigger itch, right? So the mechanisms of itch. And so over the years, scientists who are studying skin, dermatologists, as well as neuroscientists, have really figured out that itch originates in specific sensory nerves that send their projections to the skin. So their cell bodies reside in these peripheral ganglia called DRGs. And they have these really long projections to the skin. And when they sense things that could induce itch, then they send the signal up to the spinal cord and the brain. And this is a signal that says this is something itchy. And as I said, many pieces of research have looked at different types of triggers, and that one of the main triggers are immune cells, like mast cells that produce histamine and other mediators that can trigger itch. Also insect and plant-derived compounds. Our lab has been over the years very fascinated between crosstalk of the nervous system and microbes. So the microbiome, for example, of the gut and also of the skin there are many different microbes that reside in these tissues. And so one of the leading questions of our lab is, can microbes on the skin trigger itch? And so we know that in conditions like atopic dermatitis, there's microbial dysbiosis. So the bacteria on the skin, the community of bacteria changes in a way that's not beneficial. And one of the bacteria that changes is called Staphylococcus aureus. So I'm going to show you a brief video that actually highlights our research. And this was actually created by Harvard Medical School media people, just to help, because I know a lot of the people here in the audience are not scientists, and it really helps, I think, describe what our finding was. I'm going to play it now.
Itch happens with many conditions, but what exactly takes place at the level of cells and molecules has remained a bit of a mystery. Now, scientists at Harvard Medical School have discovered one cause of itch, a common bacterium called Staph aureus. The research shows, for the first time, that itch can be caused directly by a microbe, and that it happens independently of the inflammation that accompanies skin infections and other skin conditions. Here's what happens. The Staph aureus bacterium invades the skin, where it releases 10 different types of enzymes. One of these is called V8. Nearby, various proteins lie within skin neurons. One of these proteins is PAR1. Working like a pair of molecular scissors, V8 snips a dangly piece off of PAR1, which awakens the protein and initiates a signaling chain reaction. The signal flows up the skin neurons, through the spinal cord, and all the way to the brain, where it triggers that irresistible urge to scratch. Using an existing anti-clotting medication, the Harvard Med researchers were able to block PAR1 from initiating the itch cascade. This finding may lead to the design of topical creams to stop the itch-scratch cycle and prevent skin damage in various conditions accompanied by itch. The work also adds a critical piece to the puzzle of itch.
Great. So that really summarizes the key findings of our study. Oh, sorry. Okay, so this was recently published, and really this was a collaboration across many labs, but really led by Liwen Deng, who's a very talented postdoc in my lab. And just to reiterate, our main finding there was that the microbe actually produces an enzyme called V8 protease. And this enzyme has been shown for the staph bacteria to help it spread and also acquire nutrients from the host. But we found that nerve fibers, which are the itch fibers in the skin, can sense this enzyme. So they have these particular receptors called proteinase activator receptors, and one of them called PAR1 is cleaved by this enzyme and activates the nerves. So what's exciting is that now we found the molecules involved in this bacteria-induced itch, and we also know that we can block it. So if we can block the protease or the receptor, and there's a drug that was mentioned in a video called Vorapaxar, which can be used to block PAR1. And it's normally used in patients with clotting disorders because PAR1 actually is on platelets that trigger clotting. But we can repurpose this, at least in mice, we could show that if we give it to animals that are exposed to Staph aureus, that this could block their scratching, and not only block the scratching, but also block the skin damage that's associated with the itch, which is a significant part of the consequences of exposure to the bacteria. Why is this important? Is because Staph aureus is actually found on almost 100% of skin lesions with atopic dermatitis and also some other skin diseases. So it's interesting that this bacteria is present there, and we've now really made a link between how this bacteria can trigger itch, and it could be one of the triggers of itch in diseases like atopic dermatitis. So, okay, sorry. Go ahead.
No, this is great. No, and I love the video. Great. It's the best way to learn about a field is to look at a simple video like this without needing to talk about GPCRs or anything else, but just really understanding how things get activated. No, I think this is really the next questions. What's next? And especially what's next, but in the connection between itch and food allergies. What are the outstanding questions of making that connection? There's a lot of data. What it's missing to make that connection between itch and food allergies?
That's a great question. So one of our immediate next questions is is there a link between what I just showed you, Staph aureus, and food allergies? So can the itch that occurs because of Staph aureus trigger an immune response that could then drive downstream food allergies? So we're actually studying that in the lab, and we're seeing if Staph aureus can promote antigen responses to food, and if we block itch, does that impact that response? I think also more generally, I think the question is, what links the skin to the gut, right? Are there circulating factors? Is the nervous system, maybe nerves in the skin, could they be linked to nerves in the gut? And when you trigger something like itch, could that also trigger immune responses, both in the skin and the gut, that drive food allergic responses? Also, what are the drivers of the neural activation and itch and scratching, and can we block these pathways to prevent food allergies? So these are all very interesting questions, and generally it just shows the body is very interconnected, and understanding the neural immune connections could potentially lead to ways of preventing or treating allergic immunity or aberrant allergic inflammation like food allergies.
Great. Thank you, Isaac. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time, and I see you want to probably, these are people you may want to thank from your lab.
Yes, so of course all of this work would not have been possible without the amazing people in my lab, particularly Liwen Deng, who really led the work on the itch and Staph aureus, and also my longtime lab manager Samantha, who watched many itch videos to help with that analysis, and Antonio Walrap, who's a very talented postdoc in the lab, who's now really driving the food allergy work in the lab and spearheading that and working collaboratively. I also want to definitely thank FASI for your generous support of our work, and also particularly Ms. Ning Draco, who we met in person before, and is very passionate about also the connection of itch and food allergies. So thank her for her support. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Isaac. Before going into taking questions from the audience, I really wanted to reiterate what you just say. Special thanks really to Ning Draco, whose generous support and the support of other committed donors really make this incredible research possible. So thanks to you, thanks to Ning and our donors. I always get the question, how can people help? There's donate, host an event, follow us on social media, and continue to join us in our seminar series. We are of the upcoming seminar series. The next month seminar series is a very exciting one with Steve Liberals, who will be talking about how the brain listens to body signals all the way from allergens to sickness. So please stay tuned for that seminar. And now I think we still have a few minutes for questions. So as I said, please send your questions to the Q&A box in Zoom, and we'll be able to get them and answer some of your questions. I can see one question, maybe it's starting with this, Isaac. Do you think that if you intervene with itch in a newborn, at a newborn stage very early, could that prevent the development of food allergies?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. So I think that really gets at this atopic march, idea, right? And so if itching in newborns really promotes the immune response in the skin that then is needed for driving, let's say, mast cells or IgE production against food antigens, then yes, I think that could be actually one of the ways of preventing development of food allergies, if that's one of the fundamental drivers, right? And so I think that, kids with eczema, that period of time, that age is a critical age, right? Because it's the first time we're experiencing new things, including exposure to food. And so from our findings too, one of the things that I know pediatricians think about is Staph aureus on eczema lesions. And even my son was advised to have a bleach bath when he was little because he had such bad eczema, right? So one of the things is to target those triggers of itch. So I think blocking itch itself, like I mentioned, is complicated, but if we can find a way of treating or preventing itch in those kids, that could actually, I think, lead to less development of food allergies. That's one of the ideas, right, of this research. So I did see one of the questions maybe related to itch. It's one of the second questions is, there are medications that help itch already, steroid creams, antihistamines. Are you saying those medications aren't able to prevent the type of itch that is caused by staph? So my answer is yes. So in our study, we actually looked at many different types of immune responses that might relate to itch, like including mast cells, which make histamines, and also T cells, which make cytokines. And none of those immune pathways actually related to staph-induced itch, because the itch that the bacteria was causing was a direct factor from the bacteria talking to the nerves. So the really only way to block that in our studies, at least in mice, was to block that interaction. And it does highlight that antihistamines do work in some situations of itch, like when you have hives, it's caused by mast cells, but it doesn't work in many situations when there's itch. And so I think there's many researchers in the field who are really trying to understand the mechanisms of itch, and we found one additional mechanism, which is this microbial factor.
There's a lot of questions, and I know we're unfortunately have only one more minute, so we may not be able to get to all of them. Maybe just one more. Do you want to take one of the other questions here, Isaac?
Sure. These are all great questions. The first one is about the thoughts about filigran deficiency in relation to immune nervous system interaction. So that's a great point. I didn't mention that. So filigran is part of the keratinocytes and the barrier of that barrier integrity of the skin. So people with mutations in filigran can get atopic dermatitis. So actually, the barrier is one of the fundamental points, right? Like if things get through the barrier, like allergens, that could trigger allergic inflammation. So I think filigran deficiency and other, barrier defects is what can also lead to greater itch, because things like Staph aureus proteases or other things from the environment will trigger the nerves more. But then there's this vicious cycle. The scratching will also damage the barrier. So I think that barrier defects in the skin could be one of the key things that lead to exacerbated nerve and immune responses, and also neural immune interactions, which could then lead to more itch as well as more allergic reactions. I can very quickly try to answer more questions. So Dr. Sean Cottrell, who's actually a leader in the itch field, so it's great that he's here. Hi, Sean. He asked which nerve fiber is more involved in itch. So this is a great question. So there are at least 2, if not 3 different types of nerves in the skin that are thought to be dedicated to itch at the molecular level. They're called NP2, NP3 neurons, and maybe NP1s as well. So these ones, and they have different receptor expression patterns. For Staph aureus, the PAR1 receptor that we found is in at least 2 of them. So there's possibly 3 as well. So we think that the PAR1, the staph is actually triggering multiple itch fibers. And one of the questions is, why do we have multiple nerves dedicated to itch? Could it be that the kind of itch you get is slightly different? Like there could be, we know when we give histamine versus chloroquine or other itch compounds to mice, they might scratch slightly different kinetics. So it could be the circuits are somewhat different, but I think this is one of the big questions in the fields, right? Like in what situations are which nerves triggered in atopic dermatitis versus other triggers of itch? And then how do each of these itch fibers talk to the immune system as well, which is a big question as well. So great question. I think, so Yang, why? Do I still have time for one question or no?
You have one more. Let's do 1 more minute if
Okay.
you can do it quickly.
Does itchy could change the skin microbiome? So that's the question. So yes, I think that's a big question now that we found a microbe can trigger itch. Does itch also change the microbiome? So that's a very good question. That's something that we would love to answer. In our study, we saw that V8 deficient bacteria did impact the amount of bacteria on the skin. So there could be part of the mechanism is that itch could impact the bacterial load on the skin, but that's to be determined. I think, especially in chronic, if you keep inducing scratching, I would suspect either the scratching itself or the damage to the skin would impact not only the immune system, but also bacteria because of consequences of inflammation. So that's something that would be interesting, especially in a chronic situation where we keep inducing itch. Yeah.
Isaac, this is amazing. And the audience, wow, a lot of good questions today. Thank you for engaging. Isaac, I want to thank you one more time. This is a clear example of the breakthrough science that FASI investigators are doing, especially at the forefront of neuroimmune interactions that connect to food allergies. So everything that you and the team are doing, we're really excited about, because it really opens the door for understanding, translating, and intervening with food allergies in a very unique way. So thank you again for your time, and lucky to have you as part of the team.
Thank you so much as well. And thank you for your questions.
Thank you everyone for joining today, and stay tuned for the next seminar series next month. We will see you soon.